Cool. So, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Ngāti Te Tiri toka iwi I tupu aki o ki manotu e onoho au Otiposi, ko Donna Smith toka ingoa, tēnā koutou.
The sound just went.
Lunch and learn, can you hear?
Okay.
Oh, apparently my internet connection is unstable. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn, hopefully. My name is Donna Smith and I'm a professional practice fellow at the School of Physio in Otago. This is my first time hosting a Lunch and Learn. I've just joined the team, so I apologise in advance for technical and other challenges. I moved to Dunedin in 2019 after working as a paediatric physio with some of you lovely people in Auckland, and that I was fortunate in that time to get to work with the lovely Cheree. So super excited to be hosting her today. As it says on the slide, we're going to have a bit of a look about partnering with the Whānau to enhance the neonatal journey. And as it said, Cheree is a senior visiting neurodevelopmental therapist at Waitematā DHB, currently doing her master's research. And Cheree, am I right in saying you've just submitted? Yay, that's exciting. And she graduated as a physio in South Africa in 2007. So a couple of other things just about the Paediatric Society before we get into Cheree's talk. If I can get the slides to behave. There we go. So this is a little bit of information about the Paediatric Society of New Zealand for those of you who it may be your first time here. In terms of it being an organisation of health professionals, which provides an opportunity for professionals with similar interests and looks at education grants as well. And there's a website link information there. And going on from that, for today, there's a Padlet page if you've got any discussion you'd like to raise. There's a feedback link there as well. And then how these sessions work is today we're going to hear from Cheree and her learnings, and then what happens is we're going to have another catch up in a month's time where we have an opportunity to all come together and to discuss it and also look at how we can put some of the things that we've learned about into our own practice as well. So without further ado, I will try and stop my share. There we go, and I'll hand over to you, Cheree.
Kia ora, I'll just share my screen. Is that visible to everyone? So kia ora, thank you for this great opportunity to share our learning from a CDS innovation project I had the privilege of leading.
Sorry, Cheree, it's just up on the view thing rather than the full screen. Oh yeah, that should work.
It's like that?
Try swap presenter. Yeah, there we go. Beautiful. Oh.
Okay. I'd like to start with a Whakatauki that really encapsulated this project for me. E hara takatoa, I te toa takatahi, engari he toa takatini. Our strength does not come from ourselves alone. Our strength derives from many. And on that note, I'd like to acknowledge everyone who greatly contributed to this project and who enabled such meaningful collaboration. Many of you will be aware of the Enabling Good Lives vision and the principles that were developed in 2011. And following this in 2018, the Good Start in Life co-design project was established to bring the voices and experiences of parents, family, and whānau of children with disabilities into the centre of decision making about the system that supports them. And from this, a Good Start in Life practice guidance was developed. In 2020, the Ministry of Health allocated funding to CDS innovation projects to contribute to a new model of care. And Waitematā DHB successfully received funding to further investigate care coordination. So these principles underpin this project. The vision for the project was for whānau who are supported by our community child health team to experience a smooth, well-coordinated across-agency service where they're empowered to have a voice in their journey from the beginning. The population targeted for this project were infants and toddlers aged 0 to 3, who were referred to our community child health team and had 2 or more health professionals within that team. And this allowed for working criteria to be established as the project developed. Initial scoping revealed that this equated to 10 to 12 referrals per month, where 47% of these referrals were families where 3 or more health professionals were involved. And this excluded the pediatricians, as well as any other external agencies, for example, Plunkett, Ministry of Education, and LENS, demonstrating how quickly the amount of people involved with a family can increase. And as there's an increase in people involved, relationship building becomes more challenging, and there's really more a need for effective communication. A phased co-design approach was taken with whānau focus groups held at each phase to incorporate feedback from the whānau and to ensure authenticity. In phase 1, we held a whānau focus group with 5 families, and a further 4 one-on-one interviews was conducted, and they represented quite a culturally diverse group of parents, including 2 Māori, 3 Asian, 2 NZ European, 1 Southeast Asian, and an Indian couple. We just had 1 dad as part of the focus group. The families all had very unique journeys, but all of their journeys had actually started in a niku or a skabo. And there was a mixture of health conditions ranging from cerebral palsy, extreme prematurity, to various genetic conditions. The main themes that the families shared was a loss of self-agency. They were very reliant on health professionals at the beginning of their journey. They didn't know what they didn't know. The beginning of the journey was a real touch point and was shared as being very challenging. And in particular, this had a great impact on their mental well-being, which is consistent with the literature in this area. They shared difficulties processing all the information they were being given, and they felt overwhelmed, and the care they received was not perceived as holistic or culturally responsive. From a current practice perspective, single discipline silo working models were still quite dominant, with no shared narrative containing the family's values or support priorities being visible to all health professionals involved. And this often was resulting in a duplication of conversations. So in phase 2, a proposed new pathway was co-designed by further exploring those touch points shared in the first phase. And this was once again done through focus groups. Parents shared how they would value having a my person / navigator early in their journey as their main point of contact, someone who could partner with them to help them access the right supports at the right time for their family. And through this, the whānau guide role was developed. The whānau guide would be someone within the existing multidisciplinary team to limit introducing yet another person into the family's home, and would also therefore enable effective teaming within that MDT. A coaching framework was used to identify support priorities and to ensure care provided was holistic and incorporated cultural beliefs and values. Within the pathway developed, Alana Winiata Kelly, the Māori patient experience lead, developed the pictorial representation you see on the screen to describe the whānau guide role. Using the tree, the roots represent the whānau and their diverse connections and resourcefulness. The branches are the community child health team who capture the light and Then the Whānau guide is the trunk who partners with Whānau to connect them to these nutrients. It also includes whanangatanga, representing close connections within the team, as well as whakawhananga, which is the process of establishing relationships. Families reported that they really liked the pictorial representation. And as part of the pathway, the intent was to have weekly care coordination meetings where we could discuss and capture the whānau's voice, their support needs or priorities, and then availability of clinicians, as we all tend to have wait lists. With the beginning of the journey being a particular touch point, part of the pathway included an in-reach into our special care baby unit to start relationship building early before discharge. Fortunately, within WDHB, our community teams are on site and therefore are able to offer an in-reach, which is not always possible at other centres. So the Whānau guide role was piloted with 4 families being discharged from Skibo. One of the families actually had 2 children with the same condition who were 16 months apart. And this enabled this family to powerfully reflect on the initial journey without a Whānau guide and maybe what the impact was with their second child and having that Whānau guide. Feedback from Whānau regarding the Whānau guide was that it made the Whānau guide made their journey less overwhelming. A mum said it makes it less overwhelming having one main contact person and not having to individually contact everyone. It takes time and it's more time away from my children, she shared. The Whānau guide was the first person that came and said, "Hey, are you okay? How do you want things?" And we then felt comfortable asking questions. Families also shared the importance of it being a partnership and expressed at times that they know there are black and white medical needs, but they want to be heard and considered. Multidisciplinary team feedback included that having the appropriate clinicians visit based on current goals or priorities was helpful. For example, bringing in disciplines as they were needed and saving up on a double up of assessments and care. There was, however, challenges, and some of these were health professionals shared that they had to learn to work in a different way and had to give up some responsibility. There were also times of tension when clinicians had concerns or had identified some risks that weren't a high priority to families. Some of the suggested improvements in how we could support this better was potentially sharing some guidelines with families from the beginning from each discipline. For example, a minimum frequency of visits or red flags that might require an earlier visit. And this related a lot to nursing practice and speech and language therapy support, where sometimes there's a lot more risk. And then to have more regular professional meetings and the ability to change your Whānau guide as the journey progresses or the child's needs change. So the graph demonstrates the number of direct contacts in the first month post-discharge for each of the families who participated in the pilot. In some instances, there was an overall reduction in visits, as you can see, but there were also families who preferred more regular visits. And in these instances, there were more joint visits or discipline specific. So overall, there was less people all contacting the family at the same time. Through this project, we were also given the opportunity to pilot Pictability as a Whānau-led goal setting tool, as a few of us had received the training through our By Parents for Parents innovation. It was piloted with 11 Whānau with an age range of as young as 7 months, and the oldest in our cohort was 2 years, 11 months. Whānau feedback regarding the use of Pictability was that it was fun and a more visual way of setting our family goals. Another parent said, the pictures give you a really good starting point to trigger your own ideas from, rather than having to come up with something from scratch. They then give you something to talk about and explain your ideas. Another parent, excellent, helped narrow down goals into micro steps. Another key component of the that was piloted was the use of a shared care platform, and Whānau Tahi software was introduced to WDHB in 2017. One of the families shared, there is a lot of repetition, which makes you question, is there a shared narrative? So we therefore wanted to pilot the use of the shared care platform as a place for the whānau's voice to be visible to all healthcare professionals involved. Currently, it is the only platform available where families have direct access to their portal and they can independently contribute to their own care plan. It is also visible to all health professionals who have access to regional clinical portal and those who are involved with the whānau. And therefore, our aim was to have greater consistency and visibility of a family's goals, their priorities, care preferences, and to facilitate more of a partnered approach. I thought it might just be useful to share an example of a care plan and what it contains. There's a couple of main headings within a care plan, but they can be individualized for that particular family. Headings in the About Me section, we've introduced subheadings as feedback has been given by various families, and this now includes, for example, care preferences. So is there a particular day that works best for the whānau? Do they prefer to receive a text? Are they happy to have appointments via telehealth? And that can be then stored for the team to see. Since doing Pictability, we incorporated the section titled Since Being Home or In the Last Month. And that's really just a section for celebration, where with the parent you can reflect on the month that's gone past and celebrate the little milestones, or as some families have put it, the little incrostones that have been achieved. And it's just, celebrating more family time together. There's a section of what matters to me, so they can put their values and beliefs in. The next section is where they can put their goals, and those goals can then be dated, and a review date can be set with a whānau as to when you'd look back on it and see how you'd progress towards the goal. And the things I will do for myself are activities or steps that the family are doing to contribute to their whānau's well-being. And then a section titled what things my care team will do, is where each discipline then puts in their plan, what they're supporting, what goal they're supporting, and how often they will be visiting. And therefore, everyone's involvement is seen by all. Whānau reported that it was very helpful to have a central point to store their goals. They found that the care plan didn't update as often as they would have liked, and not everyone in the care team knew about shared care. In my own clinical practice, the use of shared care has been a real journey. Over time, families have become more active contributors to their portal, where I've had some parents sharing how their little one is just loving participating in painting at daycare while in her standing frame. And this particular mum will often go in and on her goals she'll be achieved, or I can do this now. But it has been a real journey, and each family has really used the platform quite differently. Some prefer you to print it out, and I then use it as an intentional discussion a template. Following this at Waitematā DHB, we've currently developed a quick steps guide for our teams to facilitate a learn, do, teach approach, as we know that this is a change in practice, and we are therefore concentrating on some micro steps that our team can take to implement the single care plan more widely, and to ensure that we are partnering with whānau to ensure that their voices are heard. Thank you for listening, and I will now leave time for questions.
Cool. Kia ora, Cheree. Thank you very much for that. That's fascinating, and yeah, well done on the hard work and creativity there. So you just popped a couple of question up in the chat. Just asking about the impact it had on your workload in terms of, did it increase your work demands or reduce them, or?
As a whānau guide myself, I've reflected on it did increase my workload at the time, but I wonder if it was also due to it being a new way of working for the team, and that processes hadn't been quite set up. So there are some processes that need to support the pathway. The whānau guide role in itself was just one component, and I think there is some more work to be done in that space, because care coordination historically can, yes, add workload. And we also did try look at a case mix model for whānau guides, to ensure that it's distributed across the team, and that you don't have, families needing weekly visits and having a lot of those on your caseload.
No, that sounds great. And yeah, just a couple other questions coming up in terms of deciding who would be the whānau guide for each family.
Because it was a pilot, it was just myself and a social worker piloting concepts, and we were just getting feedback as we went from the families in the pilots, as well as our focus groups, as to what we could refine or do differently. But the thought is that it will be someone within that multidisciplinary team, that we all should be having holistic conversations with whānau, but we don't want to be duplicating those conversations.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. So I'm just checking the other questions. That whānau guide was part of the NDT, you were saying, weren't you, in terms of it was either you or a social worker. So he was just asking, is there any impact on the length of treatment or attendance and DNAs and things?
I think personally within the ones that were piloted, we had really good engagement, families, and I think it's been a real journey where initially there's a lot more support, and now I'm at a point as a whānau guide where a mum's quite independent and will just email me a list of things that she wants to ask me about, and so she's really developed her own voice. So I think engagement has been really good. And I had a mum recently, we set a goal 2 weeks ago, and she sent me a video. She's like, oh, she's already doing it. She's like cruising along furniture. And so, I think parents are very involved with like what they're observing and what they're feeding back. And so I've found personally really great engagement.
No, that sounds great, especially like you're saying, having that one person that they know as the central one, because I think a lot of the time it happens informally, but you end up kind of can chase a little bit as well. Or other questions coming through. Jane would like to know about next steps apart from here in terms of dissemination to peds and nurses and not just allied health.
Yeah, I think it's because it is a portal available regionally. So often our children with complex medical needs have lots of specialists at Starship. I think it's kind of chicken and egg a little bit. We want some quality information so that the specialists, when they go in there, they're like, oh, and recently we've been adding, like, for example, equipment. This little one's got a bingo and a standing frame and when it was last reviewed. So we need to be putting really good information, but then yes, making it more wide and known. And when little ones are transferring between Skaboo and Starship NICU, I've started to send the care plans to the therapists there to say, she's got a care plan, there's some lovely information that mum's already put in there.
And that's great, so that you're not having to repeat the story again and again to different health professionals involved as well. Yeah. On that, because there's a few questions come up about the portal and whether it's accessible and outside your DHB, whether you know that at all, or?
The software I know there's a big regional look at IT solutions, and so what with Health NZ will come, we're not 100% sure, but it's just a platform that, as far as I know, Health Alliance have a contract, and is something we can use in the meantime. but it's just for health providers. It's unfortunately not for Ministry of Education or external agencies, but families have the ability to share their plan with an external agency and choose for how long they'd like that to happen.
And in terms of the families using it, did they find it easy to use, or did they need to have quite a lot of technical or like literature, house literate, to be able to access it? Or
Yeah, absolutely. There are some families that love technology and access their portal quite freely. Others have actually chosen sometimes not even to go into the portal, but have still found great value in having a single care plan that everybody knows what's happening. And in those cases, as I say, I print it out, and then it's an intentional talking tool when I go and say, last time you shared that this was really important, how is that going? And so then we can reflect. And so it's been used as almost like a mana enhancing tool. And initially families do need a little bit more support as to, well, what do you want me to put in there? And then as they get used to how it's used, they're like, then they go in themselves, or like, oh, could you put a mum emailed me earlier, said, I don't want visits on this day, I want it on this day, can you change it for me? So it's a journey.
And I think, like you're saying, even just giving the option and them having some control and some choices is really empowering as well. So he was just asking whether there's anybody else here today who's using a similar model or doing anything similar. I know I went to, I was fortunate enough to go to Alaska, and they had a similar model there for their Alaskan Native Health Centre, where I think, because especially people who have so many complex needs, just to actually help coordinate and make sure people came to their appointments and that type of thing as well. So Helen's just asking, which I think you mentioned, in terms of people like the paediatricians and nurses, were they able to access the portal, or is it?
Yes, they are able to access. I think it is something a bit, we're starting to have more set up. But the mum I was referring to earlier, when she went to a paediatrician appointment, she said, oh, I've got a care plan. And I also alerted the paediatrician because she had made such lovely gains. And so it is a work in progress, but they have access. And my vision is that they will look at that and celebrate all that the family have been doing and achieving.
That sounds great.
Can I ask a cheeky one just towards the end, Cheree? As a physio in particular, I'm really curious about what this felt like and what your opinion is on how core this is to being a physio.
Since having coaching training, my practice has changed completely, and I think it's just seeing like the dopamine hit for me is when I see a family who have understood the core concepts, about how their child moves or functions, and then they've just come up with these amazing activities, and I've seen programs that are actively being implemented because parents are being curious about why that worked or why it didn't, and that has been such a wonderful process, and I've had to sit on my hands and learn to not always want to solve the problem, but rather engage the parents in that process.
So yeah, just a nice comment from Lucy Charles saying that you are embedding some lovely coaching frameworks and connecting and capturing the whānau voice and values and beliefs and empowering them, which sounds great. And question from Jane about whether you think other health disciplines may end up leading it, such as the nurses rather than allied health, or?
As part of the community child health team, the nurses, especially in the early journey, are critically involved actually, and they're often the first ones out there. So we are, as a health team, looking to use it together, and we're doing training with the nurses as well.
Yeah, and Helen's just said, in terms of fee, asking about different people using it, that quite often you end up with somebody within your team taking that guide role informally anyway. Yeah, that's great. If anyone's got any, I think you've been hounded for a question. And James just saying that, given your experience, do you think that there's some specific training in being a navigator that would be needed?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's support in how we ask, especially around cultural values and beliefs, and how we can and having that relationship building and empathy. I do think there needs to be some more. It's a skill that I feel like my coaching journey is still long ahead. I'm still trying to refine that skill.
Yeah, I think especially you were mentioning before about that, not trying to just fix everything, that you'd be like, oh, I can call them, or I can do this, and then, rather than like, hang on, supporting them to do it as well. So Mion's just come through and said, very exciting progress and well done. And Fee's just saying that we can continue the chat on the web link as well, if people are wanting to go through there. And as I mentioned at the beginning, what's going to happen in a month is we're hopefully all going to come back and then actually have a chance to talk about it and look at how we can implement some of it into our practice as well, because it sounds great.
Always sad to say goodbye, but I think we're at time to wrap, and all you good people get on to all your other good work. Ka kite. See you next month.
Lovely to see you. Thanks, Cheree.
Thank you.
Bye.
So lots of chats, just half finished, half started, to pick up next month.
And I just stopped the recording.